Executives today are under immense pressure. It's not just about working harder or managing stress. It's about feeling like no matter what you do, it's never enough. The demands keep rising, the expectations keep shifting, and the playbook you've relied on for years is not working as well as it once did. In last week's show, we had a deep conversation about the unrelenting stress, burnout, and leadership fatigue that many executives are facing today. And we heard you. Many of you reached out asking us if we could go a bit deeper into what's driving this core issue, why traditional methods of leadership development and building resilience just aren't working, and to speak more to what it takes to break free and gain the ability to thrive during these times. So we're making this shift in our programming to meet that request because this show is about your needs, and we want to let you know we're listening. Welcome to Unfazed Under Fire, where we go beyond quick fixes to tackle what really determines leadership success in today's high-pressure world. Our mission is to give you real, unfiltered truth. And I'm joined by two incredible co-hosts, Ryan McShane and Anatoly Yakarev. Ryan is the founder of HR Evolution, a firm that supports, among other things, the development of leadership and helps organizations build high-performing, human-centered cultures. Anatoly is an expert in ethics and compliance and leadership transformation and is a co-creator of the Resilient Leader Method. He has a rare and proven ability to rapidly expand human consciousness that instantly impacts leadership performance. So as requested, gentlemen, we're taking a deeper dive into the resilience crisis that leaders are facing and to dive deeper into the areas that I just mentioned. So in the last show, you may remember we talked about a lot of the challenges executives are facing, this unrelenting pressure, constant disruption that they're under. But before we dive deeper into the shift that leaders really have to make and the real solution, I want us to take a little bit harder look at some of the current methods for developing leaders that aims to assist them to develop as leaders and deal more effectively with stress. And I want to make sure this is not about throwing leadership consultants and trainers and coaches and other developmental programs under the bus. But the truth is leaders are still struggling despite their investment in these resources. It's clear that something fundamental is missing. So let's take a look at these interventions that leaders engage one at a time. And at the top of the list is these university executive programs like from Harvard and other business schools. And those programs are very robust. They provide great frameworks. They sharpen the intellect. They have these acclaimed professors that are leading these robust educational programs that tend to have a strong experiential component to them that it puts executives into high pressure situations to help them promote their growth and apply what they're learning. And they provide an opportunity for executives to learn with and from their peers who are in the program in similar positions. However, organizations spend tens of thousands of dollars on these programs. So what are your thoughts about their limitations given what executives are dealing with today? Are there any?
Seems to be, to me, to be a bit of a regurgitation of what we know, but just at a slightly deeper level. And I use the analogy with you, David, that, everything's evolved and changed except leadership development and the notion of leadership. And so it's like using the VCR in a digital age. We are still operating from antiquated technology and applying it to a new atmosphere and environment that requires advancements in our technical capacity as leaders. I think that kind of framing is helpful to really understand how out of date and how behind we are in terms of what has leadership done over the last 30 years or so to really evolve and keep pace with all the advancements of technology, which challenge us on a continuous basis.
Yeah, I want to build off something you said. The profession and all the different modalities that have helped develop leaders have been really good about articulating conceptually what leadership is and also researching what you can do about that from a structural conceptual framework. And that's been a gift. But, then you go back into the fray, right? Right. So Anatoly, you've had some experience, I think, at BP with these things. You've seen leaders go through these programs. You have some insights on that.
Okay, I'll start with something.
Like, what's that face? I can tell you have an opinion about this.
Yeah, I know. Well, I have an observation to share first. I think most of these programs have some fundamental flaw, which is rooted in the kind of Western Anglo-Saxon culture. The problem is you have to fix it yourself. So people tend to look at this more like if there is something I'm doing or I'm not doing, I should be held accountable for fixing the way I'm doing things. Unlike other cultures that, provide more overview, like, well, don't be that self-centered. You may need help from the community, from the village elders. Look at them, they're chomping at the bits to help you. So people look at this broadly, whereas the Western culture tends to be like, I can do it. Yes, I can kind of approach, right? So
Yeah.
that's where the problem is. So therefore, people then take the next approach. Okay, well, if you look at all the existing methodology, it's all about fixing everything at the mental level. Learn more, use some metrics, let's measure this, let's report this, let's do 360, blah, blah, blah. But it's all mental noise, which will never get to the bottom of the problem, which is rooted in subconsciousness, which is rooted in all those layers of conditioning, upbringing, and what have you. So the light never shines down there. So therefore, you cannot fix yourself at the mental level using the power of your will. Your willpower is not enough to get you reset, restructured, rebuilt, fixed. Okay? So that's why, those people who create programs for leaders, I will not use their names, but you will get them like, strobe lights, stomping feet, clapping loudly, walking around, talking in a loud voice. Well, it's all just emotional effect meant to impact people. And people being fooled into believing that if they go through some deep emotional turmoil, that's a sign of something changing deeply within, which is not the case. So we just have to address that first. Now, expensive programs that are out there, they also over time realize that they need to be moving someplace else. So that's why they started playing with psychedelics and ayahuasca retreats, all this nonsense. They always say like, well, that doesn't work for everyone, but maybe 1 in 5 or 10 people is guaranteed to have some transcendent experience. But again, it will not take you to a level where you want to go with some level-headed approach. Now, those programs I witnessed, BP executives took back then more than a decade ago, they came back and I usually ask them the same question. Tell me 3 things you learned that was worth all the trouble of traveling, doing all that. And, they would struggle. They would give me 1 or 2. Like, okay, now I know I have a hard stop at 6 p.m. I go home. I'm not staying until 10 p.m. doing stuff, pouring over papers. I said, yeah, this is great. This is all you learned from that expensive program that you could.
Yeah, they had some good meals. They had some brandy with their friends at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night at the bar, the hotel, et cetera. Yeah. They're kind of cushy programs. I mean, obviously, if you're spending that kind of money, and it is useful to kind of connect with colleagues. But again, all of this is wonderful. So is vacation, and that's even better compared to this. Maybe the university would say, well, something deeply has changed in them, and it'll come out as they do their jobs. I mean, that's maybe what they would say. But let's look at another one. There are more and more what I call resilience first aid courses that people are being invited into, and you might do it online. There might be a lot of online practices, or you might have a trainer come in and engage even the senior team into helping them. And on the positive front, this kind of can help leaders understand the neuroscience that's going on in them, the fight and flight and freeze concept, and that's useful, and how to intervene and manage stress, because a lot of it is, it's not about stress, it's about processing stress. So you're going to be under stress as an executive, and most executives actually enjoy the stress. The question is, are you taking care of yourself and cleaning yourself out every day so you could be ready for the next day? So these programs, teach them engaged practices to promote well-being, so they can intercede to, oh, I'm getting reactive, let me cut it off at the pass, right? Or I'm going to do more longer practice. So we spoke a little bit about meditation last week, where I'm going to have this regular practice that over time does show positive effects. But the question is what happens after these courses, and how long does that stay in the leader's top of mind when they face their next challenging situation?
So, David, what's interesting is I teach a number of different leadership courses, as you know, and retention of knowledge and transfer of knowledge is something that I really pay attention to a great extent, because obviously, we can say, oh, this is wonderful. I'm in this class. I'm really getting it. And then we go back to the work environment and we're distracted once again. And one methodology of retention of information that I share with my students oftentimes is, hey, listen, if you don't even look at this information that we've discussed today, within 2 days, within only
Right.
2 days, you're going to lose about 90% of what we talked about. However, if you continue to look at this information for the next 6 days, spend 15 to 20 minutes looking at this information, reviewing it, you will then recall about 60% of what we've covered for the next 15 years. So that repetition is
Yeah,
important.
that's important. And that's a
And
good point.
ultimately, that's what it takes to really shift you from, oh, that's nice, to being able to accumulate that information and start applying it as a part of your new framework in terms of how you operate. So I think one of the downfalls is lack of reinforcement in many of these programs. And that's where I think coaching is so pivotal, is to make sure
Yeah,
that there's that advancement of the information and it's being applied on a regular and recurring basis, because it's all too
yeah.
alluring and distracting that when we get back into the work environment, oh, I've got those demands again. And we basically throw away everything that we just learned in that wonderful executive course. Or we say, well, that doesn't really apply in this environment. Well, it all applies, but you're not thinking about it in the same respect that you did in the classroom environment. So we've got to have attention paid to that transfer of knowledge and an application of that in the environment, instead of just conceptually having those kind of conversations. So I think that's a part that plays a factor.
I think that's something probably not a lot of trainers necessarily teach their people when they're leaving a course, which I think is important. That's really a real nugget there that you provided. It comes down to the value the individual, the executive who goes through that program, that they place on that, given what else is going on for them. But it's important that 6-day thing is an important thing. Spend 15 minutes over the next 6 days. Can you do that? And that's up to them, right? But that's a really important thing to know. So, Anatol, any thoughts you have on the idea of resilience training and the blessings and the curses of it, so to speak?
Well, I think that probably with the current work environment, people should be learning from somebody like Navy SEALs or like some rigorous military training, because technically speaking, you're dealing with people in a lot of unpredictable business environments. Your system, your nervous system, you may not control yourself the whole time because of the level and the quality and the depth of those challenges. People can snap, very quickly. But if you go through some boot camp of those training programs that they do, then you definitely can get some value for the resilience, because that level of resilience is meant to be instilled for people to exercise in the battlefield. I mean, this is the best that you can get.
Right. Well, if you do that, it's actually getting in the muscle memory, right? You're doing things over and over again. Those special forces people, they're on autopilot when something happens. I mean, they're trained how to have bullets miss them. And it's like pretty cool stuff they learn.
Well, look. I was raised by special military special ops, because my dad was in the military, and I was like had so much time to myself.
Yeah,
So
pretty cool.
I got into martial arts, and I was training with them, and they were using me just to beat me up, to train their tricks on me. Hey, they didn't treat me any different, even though my dad was a top brass. So that's how I learned it the hard way. When you talk about the muscle memory, the best trick is like you die the first time, then you come back to, and then oh, it's not that scary. So you stop being scared. So that's why they kind of practice that on people. Like, you drown, they drown you, you come back to life, you're okay. They don't even have to resuscitate you. I know that doesn't sound pretty, and it doesn't look.
I know they do that. They actually die in the training, right? They go through the death experience so that they're brought back. I'm trying to imagine senior executives going to a training like that.
It's a lesson of
get that key man insurance in place before you go to that training. But I'm also trying to imagine some of my clients going to a boot camp. That is one way. It is definitely one way, because it kind of gets to that shift in the consciousness and in the body and in knowing how to deal with things in a very intense way. And I think, probably there's not too many resilience trainings out there that are to that level of rigor. I think pointing back to what you said about the the deepening that happens when you go to special forces training. So I've meditated for 40 years. I enjoy meditation. I find time and to connect with myself more deeply. And that is something that is valuable to me. And I, every once in a while during the day, I'll take a mindfulness break, however I do that, whether it's even going out and feeling the sun on my face or taking a deep breath. And it's helpful. So it's not that any of those things are helpful yet. The key challenge I see for them is they don't remove the underlying burden. That goes back to what you're saying about special forces. That after a while, I can handle anything, right? There's something about the underlying traumas or paper cuts we've gotten through our lives or the emotional burdens that we've taken on that we don't even understand that are there, that these kind of like soften them for a moment, but then you're back into it, right?
As you share that, David, there's a statistic that I share with many of my clients from a training and development standpoint, and I talk about consciousness from this standpoint, speak to it from the negative. Whether we know it or not, they say that about 95% of our waking life is spent unconsciously. And I have to repeat that and say, yes, I just said
That'd be true.
95% of your waking life is spent unconsciously. And they're like, well, if I'm awake, what do you mean I'm unconscious? And then I ask them, well, how many of you have driven home from work and wondered, how the heck did I get here? In other words, we're off somewhere else in La La Land,
Autopilot.
contemplating.
Yeah.
We're on autopilot. We don't even think about what we're doing. We wonder if we made stops at the stop signs and things like that. But here we are. We're sitting in our driveway at this point, and we're like, how did we get here? And I think that's something that many of us have experienced. So that brings to them the notion of that's what he means when we say we spend 95% of our life unconsciously. Well, we are operating from that that conditioning, that automaton, that just going through the motions, going through the habitual practices that we go through, and we're not even thinking about it. So I love when you're talking about taking those mindfulness breaks and just really focusing on what's going on in my body right now. Can I feel the sun on my face? Those kinds of things that brings about that conscious moment for you. And I think that for by and large, what we're talking about is a higher order of leadership that is predicated on this model of consciousness, where I think most still reside, and this is important for our audience to really recognize, where most still reside is they're operating from conditions and habitual thinking. And that really resonates with the fact that we have a situation where a lot of people find themselves in leadership roles, but never even have been trained to be leaders. You talk about people going to these executive conferences and things of that nature. I think those are the rarity. Those are the minority that have even been exposed to leadership development training programs to even contemplate what we're talking about. Many of them have been thrust into these leadership roles. Oh, you're a great individual contributor. Let's put you in charge of other people when they're vastly different skill sets. And then we wonder why they're not successful, and everyone underneath of that person is starting to leave the organization because of how they've been treated. So when we look at that from that standpoint, what's your first exposure to leadership? It's the family dynamic, isn't it? And I don't know about you, but I think most of us have grown up in an authoritarian environment. I heard my dad say one or two times, hey, son, it's my way or the highway around here. And so from that standpoint, if you've not been exposed to different models of leadership, you do what you know. And what you know is where the hell at.
Right. And I see this all the time. I mean, I worked in some developed leaders in some top professional services firms. And the ability of Autopilot and a highly trained, experienced consultant, they're conditioned to come into a situation that's highly complex, that's confusing the heck out of another organization. And they go, you just do this, this, right? That's it at a positive level. But what you're pointing to is we also bring baggage in to our work life that we haven't resolved, and we're building off of models that we, just like that consultant that's spent years developing their prowess to see, and they're seasoned and they're able to see multiple situations, and they spent years from an individual contributor all the way up to a partner in a firm. That's a conditioning that actually serves, right? But we also come with that same conditioning that we bring in from our lives. And that's a really good point. And we want to touch on that when we go into the next phase of this conversation for sure. Because that to me is what's at the heart of what's keeping people from dealing with the challenges that we're facing today as leaders, for sure. One thing I wanted to also mention is like the one other modality that we talk about is executive coaching. And I think and then this coaching actually touches on some of these things because it says, why are you reacting in a situation like that consistently? I notice you're doing it here, here, and here, and it's kind of putting your direct reports on their back heels, or it's cutting you off from an opportunity there. So coaching is an effective way for people to see the playing field clearly, to support them in getting out of their head and directing more effective approaches. It can help them make better decisions. It can provide distinctions, which I think one thing a coaching thing is, how do you see the playing field and relationship of running meetings, of building your team, and other ways in a clear way, so you're not wasting your time or doing things that are ineffective. So it does all that very, very well. And I, of course, have been doing it for 25 years and enjoy doing it. Yet in the environment we're in today, we are actually running up against a completely different client who's dealing with completely different situations. And I said earlier last week, coaches have been through this crazy time too, right? So we're all adjusting as well. How do you see coaching hitting some walls and hitting some limitations right now? The actual modality to help people deal with this increasingly intense environment that executives are in. Any thoughts?
Well, this is interesting because if you think about reinventing coaching, just to get people to tap into what could be offered to them is a very interesting situation, because a lot of coaches, coaching schools, and organizations that offer training, that start looking outside, because they cannot offer anything at a mental level to help people process and learn something quickly on the fly and then apply it. With the level of complexity that we're dealing with right now and unpredictability, you cannot do that. Plus, everybody wants this quick fix, instant gratification for anything they can get. Give it to me right now because I'm entitled to it, because of all the stress and all the crap I'm taking at work. Give it to me right now. So that's how people feel, because they think, well, if the level of complexity goes up in my work environment, there should be some solutions being created to counter that. And you guys are telling me in my face that you don't have those solutions for me? How's that possible? You can't be just scratching your butt and not doing anything. So you see, this is what I'm hearing from people who say, look, there's got to be something. So therefore, you have this strange tendency now that people saying, well, we have more coaches now who get certified to offer this counseling for the use of psychedelic in the process, because we need to look elsewhere to get people jolted a bit. And
you see you see trauma-informed coaches coming in.
They're not even looking at that level. They're just looking for something to throw on top of the traditional coaching. So people will have a bit of an intense experience. Then you can push down their throat the traditional coaching, and then voila, the issue is solved. So, they're looking for ways to combine it, or maybe like some people say, well, maybe you need a bit of become a more like an adrenaline junkie. You start doing something like really borderline, and then we'll build from there.
That's a really good point. I mean, when I came out and I said I was a coach, they said, what sport? Now it's like everybody's the coach, right? And in most cases, the coaching is relying on intellectual breakthroughs rather than what we talk about with special forces, embodied shifts. Because there's such a wide range of people that are in coaching right now, maybe people that have exited the C-suite that now want to become a coach, for example. They don't think they need training. They're just going to go in and be a mentor, basically, is what they do. Tell them how to deal with situations, which could be valuable. But bottom line is, I think you have a lot of coaches since 2020 repackaging what they do, like you mentioned, like, okay, let me do psychedelic integration with you. And that's important. That's valuable. That'll help you see the world differently and shift your perspective. We have trauma-informed coaches coming out. But then basically you're going back, even though trauma interventions tend to be faster than traditional training and therapy interventions, it's still we've got to take some time to kind of look at this stuff. And then you got to enroll an executive in that, because that's going into sensitive areas. And then there's also a mix of coaches that are varying degrees of their own development, right? So they use AI to regurgitate, okay, how do I teach this book to my client? There's that level of coaching. And you have executives that have done it that may not have done a lot of their own personal development. And here they are coaching. To coaches out there that I deeply respect that have done their work and they are a presence on the call with those clients. I think, Ryan, you're one of them. I think I put myself in that category. You're trying to create an environment where they can kind of shift, and you have done that shift. And so you can guide them in that shift. But depending on the coach a client works with, when the engagement is over, similar to what you're saying about training, but not maybe as powerful, because there has been some 6 months, 8, 9 months, a year working with that coach. So some things have stuck, but it also kind of fades over time. And unless they stay in touch with it, and that's a lot of times what I spend time on at the end of my engagements, to make sure they're going to spend time on it, like you do it at the end of a lot of your trainings, Ryan. But still, does it actually have lasting impact is the question. We've talked about these modalities. Any other thoughts on what executives are doing to try to resolve kind of the challenges they're facing in this highly disruptive world? Anything else you want to say about what we've talked about around the methods?
What I think is interesting is, and it goes back to what you had said before, David, that in our Western culture, or just do it society, borrowing a little bit from Nike's branding, I think that the answer for most people is do it harder. What Anatoly and you are really explaining to our audience is you can do it harder all you want, but until you shift your paradigm and your perspective, you just get a sharpened nose. They always say, put your nose. Well, all I've gotten from that was a very sharp nose. Yeah. And I've been told all my life, hey, you work hard, everything will work out all right for you. I'm sorry, but that's a very sweetly packaged lie. So you keep working harder and harder and harder, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the outcomes that you're looking for. And I think that that's an awakening moment for many executives to really recognize that. Well, I've had success over here, so it did work a little bit. Well, I've had success over here, but it did work a little bit. We are getting to the point where those successes are going to become fewer and farther, because that working harder just doesn't materialize the kind of results that we're talking about. And it really takes that shift that you both are describing. And I think that's the most important thing I want for every listener to take away from this, is doing it harder is not going to change anything at this point in time. We need to really shift our perspective and our paradigm. And that's what I'm most excited about, is getting into that space of getting people a taste of that shift. And then they'll see exactly what we're talking about.
So I want to move into that. It's a perfect segue. And what you're saying is executives don't need more tools, or they don't need more intellectual understanding or trying to figure things out. They need to shift the way they operate. And what we're talking about is a higher level of consciousness, is what we're pointing to, is how leaders process challenges, make decisions, and lead under pressure. So given that, let's revisit that critical distinction. What is consciousness, and why is raising it the single most effective way for executives to handle the pressure? In the last show, Anatol, you said that consciousness at its core is this resource that's kind of outside our body, different from the intellect, different from physical vitality. It belongs to us, and it's something that we can develop and expand. And as you also noted, that there's levels of consciousness. As we go up the scale, this brings with it an upgrade in resilience and ability to have impact as a leader. That's one way of viewing it. And there's a longer articulation in the last show if you want to go back and listen to that. But I also want to talk about other ways we can understand what this thing consciousness is. Because again, on one level, it's really hard to explain. On another level, it's very easy to experience. So if you point people in the right direction, or we can share a couple metaphors and ways of looking at this that can help people get their arms around what we're saying is the place that makes it easier, not working harder, right? That's what we're getting to with your last comment. So let's talk a little bit about that.
I'll just speak from the perspective that business people relate to. Let's not talk about consciousness and a classic, definition. What's all about? Two things that come from consciousness: awareness and awareness of a higher purpose. Because a lot of business people, they are locked in this everyday rat race, survive the day to live another day tomorrow. But the awareness that there is something bigger. There's a bigger personal purpose. And then there is a long-term vision. This concept gives them the right perspective. So I'm aware of what I am inside of me, of my external environment, but the sense of purpose is on the list that business leaders try to attain. Of course, they may talk about operational excellence, business continuity, financial results. They couldn't care less. These days, on top of their list is my mental health, because I am really losing it. I don't want to lose this race, end up in the ditch just because I can't keep it together. So being aware that there's a bigger purpose, there's a way to get there and have this long-term perspective, they can easily relate to. Now, that is a promise and assurance that there is a certain mechanism they use to get there. That should keep them afloat so that they can keep pedaling towards that goal. They don't like hearing lofty words and something really nice. Say, look, how do I get there? Okay. And usually it starts with this first thing, trust. Because usually people tell me, I trust you, you could get me there. This is the first thing they say to me. There's the Russian oxytocin, okay, this is the guy I could trust. Okay, let's go there. So consciousness is, from their perspective, is to be aware of the challenges. And then there's a road ahead and an idea how to get there.
Well, one of the avenues for consciousness is a leader's attention, which is their primary resource, right? How do they focus their attention on what things, and when do they have the choice or don't have the choice of what to focus on? Going back to special forces, which is a great metaphor, when they're in a situation, they know exactly what to focus on, and it's autopilot. It's autopilot in the sense that they're attentive to it. The autopilot is not autopilot, because that's the dangerous thing when they go into their missions. But the autopilot is bring my focus back to my attention. And, I think you're speaking to that, how are they ensuring they're focusing on the right things? How can they get that in a way that they're moving the cheese every day in a certain way? Yeah.
A Zen master once used this tactic to bring about presence and consciousness in his students by asking the very simple question to all of his students, what is missing in this moment? And as the students sat there and were like, missing, what's missing? What's missing? And ultimately, they recognized that what's missing is their presence, that they're constantly thinking about the next thing. And I think that that's a slippery slope that many leaders find themselves in. I can certainly recognize myself in that paradigm that, it's always on to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And so how present are we? And how focused are we? And how self-aware are we? Therefore, marshaling and bringing in our full consciousness to an experience, we cannot do that when we're always on to the next thing. So I hope that illustration is helpful for the audience as well.
It is. And it goes back to what you're saying, 95% of the time we're unconscious. So we think when we're thinking about the next thing that we're conscious. And we are, there's some degree of consciousness there because we're thinking about the next thing. But when we're not bringing ourselves back to the presence. Now, this goes back to the challenge. How do executives constantly remind them they don't want to do that? So how do they do that automatically? It goes back to the special forces training, right? How do they do that so they're just present? See, this is the capacity of human beings to just be present and not be distracted and not be unconscious is possible. And when you get to that level, the whole game of leadership changes. We always talk about there's the only thing that you can do about anything is now. And that's maddening when you think about it. I guess I get mad at that. So what, right? Well, if you already in the now and you're always present to the now, you don't have to worry about that anymore because you're just there. And the idea that we can operate and still bring in our sophisticated experience and knowledge and intellect and bring it into the moment and focus it and garner the support and have the right conversation at the right time and trust what's going to happen next goes back to trust, right? Learning how to trust that what's going to happen next, follow through, coach our people, all that can happen in presence. But again, as you say, Anatoly, executives don't have time for all that fluffy talk, but that's at the core of it. Let's get to at the core of it. What's the practical impact of a higher level of consciousness? We talked a little bit about this in the last show, but I think we need to do a little more digging. What does developing my consciousness and being more consistently not unconscious, as you pointed to it, Ryan, what is the value of that? Just to kind of put an exclamation point on this part of the show.
Okay, I will explain it in a very simple way. We talked about, people like talking about being in some altered state. And this is an idea if I experience that, whether with the use of psychedelics or doing something else, doesn't matter. If I only experience that, it means I get a perspective and I get my consciousness expanded. This is where 90% of people get stuck because they believe that once they experience that bliss or that moment, or some epiphany, right? Ineffable moment. And then that means that, okay, this is it. I'm on top of the world. Now I will operate from that perspective. This is where the fallacy is. You always fall back where you were, regardless of the depth of the experience. Now, lots of ways to experience that, but unfortunately, you still have to roll back and build from there. Now, a high level of consciousness is a different story. It's like you experience something and you get to keep it. You get to own your results. It's a game changer. You get to own your results. Whatever you experience, you take it to another day and it stays with you. That means because you are on a different level of consciousness than where you were yesterday. You see what I'm saying? That's why there's a huge difference between having experienced some magical moments. Yeah, but you can't take it to the bank. Whereas the highest state of consciousness or higher level of consciousness, okay, you had your experience and you get to own it. So that's why it appeals to business leaders, because they know that they can take it home and they can build off it and they can integrate it in their practice on a daily basis. So that's what it is. And definitely a lot of people who look at this, they say, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but there's nothing that can get you there. Only if you persevere, you meditate, you spend in mindfulness, being grateful, you journal, you jog, you exercise your body, your mind, you do some breath work. You're just being consistent year after year. That's going to raise your consciousness. Yes, but it's going to be happening very slowly, very slowly. You will not be able to see results. It's like you take yoga classes. You can't get yourself in a pretzel after 2 weeks. I mean, you can't. Your body will never allow you to do that.
It takes years to develop.
Yeah, well, it takes years. That's exactly it. So that's why, we're talking about this. It's like, okay, let's look around. There's nothing that can get you to a high level of consciousness without some deep internal change that could be catalyzed by something outside of your existence. So, yes, there are certain. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that. I mean, what I like about this is like all those other things we talked about, maybe except with the exception of coaching, you're trying to get something from the outside and bring it into you to make your life better, when you're basically saying you have ownership over the capacity to do that. Regardless of the length of time it takes, you can control that through discipline, whether you go through a boot to camp for special forces, get it embodied quickly, because they're building their consciousness. That's what they're doing. That's they're focusing on the operating system so that it can be kind of invincible and impenetrable in intense situations. That's the development of consciousness. Yes, and they're developing abilities along with that, because abilities come as your consciousness is raised. You can see there's more resources available to us. But the bottom line is you have the ability to take charge of developing those capacities in yourself. And the other thing, well, as the consciousness rises, giving the stresses executives are, how does that help process stress more effectively? Because it really isn't about the stress, it's about processing stress. So as you expand in your consciousness, what does it have to do with processing stress more effectively?
Well, it's not only stress, because you see, with the expansion of your consciousness, with the elevation of your consciousness, you raise yourself on multiple levels. Because, stress could be multifaceted. It's not just interpersonal relationships strained because at work you do something or you have partners out there. No. The idea is that at a higher level of consciousness, you get upgraded, neurally upgraded. It's more like a biohack, that your energy goes up, productivity goes up, performance goes up, mental clarity goes up. Everything that you need to have, your focus, mental sharpness, all of that goes up. So therefore, when you start talking about the level of stress, you're dealing with that stress at a totally different level. So it's not just only like your resilience goes up, you experience the spike and you feel more resilient towards the stress. No, you're boarded up and you take yourself to a totally different level. So that's why one of my clients who used this term invincibility, she was a cop and she said, look, I feel invincible. That's what it gives me. Yeah. Because she looked at her situation at work, risking her life every day. She said, look, that's what I need. And that's what it gives me. She didn't want to dig into like which element and why all that happened. She said, can I own it? Can I take it home, please? I said, yeah, it's yours. I cannot take it away from you.
Let's recap kind of where we've been and where we are. So at this point, frame that leadership burnout and turnover at all-time highs. But the real issue isn't stress. It's about processing or dealing with it in a different way by owning this part of you. And we've talked about the lack of processing of stress comes from an understanding of neuroscience and research that shows that chronic stress kind of rewires the brain, pairs of executive function and creativity and emotional regulation, and it makes it harder for leaders to make sound decisions. The increased pressure that's coming from trying to process this stress from day to day is getting to people. Going to your point, I think there's 44% of executives are struggling with mental health issues. McKinsey report just recently found out, and that's affecting their decision making and their performance. And then we have C-suite turnover that's happening. Leaders are so overwhelmed that they're exiting. Last year, 1,500 CEOs left their jobs. The year before, 39% of CEOs left their jobs. Executives who remain with the same mindset, we're saying, will continue down the burnout path. It's happening. What's going to change it? Traditional stress management tools only treat the symptoms. And you got to practice it for years. We don't even know what 3 years from now is going to look like, given what's been changing, right? So for even executives that learn engagement tools, they find it challenging to consistently engage them. So raising consciousness eliminates the root cause. That's what we're saying. That's what we came to in this last section. And stress is no longer owns the leader. They're in charge of the perception shift. So what I want to do now is revisit this resilient leader method, which is a solution that works 100% of the time. And as we noted last week, the resilient leader method is co-created by Anatoly. I was very honored to be able to do this with him. Isn't a leadership program. It's a fundamental reset that shifts some of the things that Anatoly is just talking to in the executive's consciousness with those benefits, allowing you to operate in this new state of resilience, clarity, power, invincibility. And as research shows, higher stages of leadership are a shift in consciousness. And so it engages at a higher level. So I want to talk a little bit about a client of mine that I thought it'd be good to share a story. So I'm going to share a story of Amy, one of my clients who engaged the method. And when I first met her, she had just stepped into her new role as CFO of a fast-growing high-tech company. Now, Amy was really sharp, strategic, had a reputation for building high-performing teams. From the start, it was clear that she was an exceptional leader. This is the people I love to work with. They're already exceptional leaders because they're the most ones that are usually hungry to grow and develop. That's why I love working with them. And she was respected by her colleagues and the CEO. They went through a lot of great efforts to pull her into the organization. The CEO met her and knew right away, you need to be my CFO. That's the kind of person she was. So we worked together on her onboarding into the organization, and she thrived in her role. She strengthened her team, refined financial strategies and processes, and made a real meaningful impact on the organization. And the CEO, quite frankly, saw her as his successor. That's kind of why he wanted to bring her in. But he said, Amy, you have to figure out some things. There's something in your executive presence, and there's a little bit of lack of confidence that you have to work on. And I need to see that you can go toe-to-toe with the board when you need to. And so that's when I introduced her to the resilient leader method. She was willing to take the leap, and the transformation was undeniable. Immediately, Amy noticed a shift. She felt a surge of energy, heightened focus, renewed sense of creativity. She talked about the energy. Like, I just feel all this energy and capacity and clarity. And she would talk about it over and over on our post-reset calls. And work also no longer felt like a grind, going to your point. It just didn't feel the same way anymore. She was moving through her days with ease. Her interactions with her team were more fluid, more engaging, and even at home, she was more present with her kids. I know a lot of senior executives that go home and they said, I have a hard time getting my day out of my head. I'm still focused on my day and what's going on. But she found that she was able to just be present with her family when she went home. Another challenge she had is she couldn't sleep through the night. She slept like a baby after this. So then weeks later, after delivering a major board presentation following the reset, her CEO just pulled her to the side and said, I don't know what you've been doing, but after seeing you present today, I can see you're ready to go. And shortly after, she was promoted to COO. And in January this year, she's now officially in the CEO role. So she raised her game in a massive way, not just because she's learned new leadership tactics, because she unlocked this resilience, took charge somehow of this consciousness in her to gain this clarity presence that was already inside her all the time, which is to your point earlier, Anatoly. And this is a typical result. This is not just happens with every third executive we put through this process. Every executive has a similar experience of that result. I wanted to share that story because I just thought it would bring it together. But here's what I would be thinking. I'd be thinking in the audience, like, okay, she didn't go to some long training. She didn't work for years to meditate. She didn't consciously like figure out how to root out whatever was limiting her to get to that next level of confidence and ability to be in the moment with people that sometimes she had would go on her back of her heels of. This happened like this. That sounds awfully suspicious to me. I mean, that's immediate. How could she have shifted her behaviors in such a dramatic way? So I want to ask you, Cam, Tilly, so, okay, you go in and do these 2 1-hour sessions of reset. That's all it takes, 2 1-hour sessions. Maybe there are a little longer sessions depending on the client, but it's within a few days. You're now in this new state of consciousness, this new state of clarity, new state of resilience. How could it happen that fast?
Well, think about the stuff that everybody talks about, neuroplasticity. If you want to develop a new skill, you work at it and your brain gets rewired to accommodate that new skill. Okay. Usually it takes a long time to develop it. Well, think about the reset as being this instant neuroplasticity to rewire your brain to be in the most optimal state. And it happens in a very consecutive manner. First, you get this rewire, then you get that rewire. No, it just goes across the board, across your hard drive. So that's why I was looking for a scientific term, that would explain it better. And it goes as a functional synaptic plasticity. And specifically, it's called compensatory masquerade. It's a very fancy term, don't ask me. But it's the response of the brain to any external stimuli to quickly rewire and be prepared to deal with your environment in a completely new way. So this is the best part. Like you said, David, it's all inside of us. So we don't have to learn anything. We just have to be exposed to something that causes us to instantly and quickly rebuild and rewire ourselves, and then we have all our goodies made available to us. So
what you're saying is that form of Amy was already in her, that there was something maybe layered on top of that was hesitating. And I think a lot of our clients say, I feel like I realize after the reset, I've had brakes on most of my life. And when the brakes come off, really that happens. More the true self of that person comes forward with all their capabilities, their experience. As I said, she already had the chops, right, to do this. And so that just came forward more and allowed her to engage more effectively. There's this excitement that comes for the clients too. There's this kind of, all of a sudden goes back to your idea of purpose. There's sense of, I have something to do here. That's beyond just my job and my role. So I want to talk a little bit about the value of the coaching too. Why coaching post-reset versus pre-reset? We talked about coaching being a really good modality in general. I'm a fan of coaching, but there's all kinds of challenges with it that we also mentioned earlier. Post-reset, imagine being a coach working with somebody that's now at the top of their game. Yet they haven't been at the top of their game prior to the reset. So it's almost they're living in a new territory and they have all this energy, all this excitement. One of the first things I do with them is really revisit their purpose, their vision, their leadership brand. What is the field of play you want to play in? What are the sidelines and the yard markers? And how do you want to focus this energy to? And I remember Anatoly has to do that with me every once in a while. I get a little too ahead of myself. Just get focused. Right? So coaching helps them sharpen what game they want to play because now the field is completely open. They can do whatever they want based on their passion and their skill and their experience. Now, what is it that you want to frame? Because again, you're in charge. I love that. You're in charge of this. So take responsibility for these new abilities that you have and this new invincibility you have. That's a lot of what the coaching does. And after the reset, people have to be reminded of what they got. It's kind of like the 6 days of 15 minutes. You have to have a period of months following the reset to have your mind, which is still has some of the programming in it, even though it's unhooked for the nervous system so you don't react. But there's still ways of thinking that you have to kind of, nope, let's see if that's true. They'll say, that old confidence thing came back to me today, David. So let's revisit that. Is that really there? And they'll
So
go, well, it came up and it's a thought, but it's not in my body anymore. The reaction is not there. Oh, I can let it go. It's kind of like that.
you're talking, so much is coming to me. One of the most epiphanal moments I had in my life was early on in college. And I remember thinking this thought of, to define it is to limit it. And those definitions of what we believe ourselves to be ultimately become our identity. And when you have a limited identity of who you are, those are the retarders, the buffers, the things that hold us back. I'm a young Irish kid, and based on my definition and perspective of who a young Irish kid is, that's who I am. And so that's how I operate. And what you're talking about is redefining the identity in some respects.
Absolutely. Well said.
We're
That's exactly
stepping
right.
back from that notion of who we are to almost be limitless. And that's
Yes.
the field of consciousness that I think Anatoly's talking about as well, as we get to tap into that once we stop seeing ourselves as this limitation of who we've defined ourselves to be within our identity. So what would I be if not Ryan? And I think that very question in and of itself immediately expands my consciousness.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, the framing of identity is such a is the most powerful way to frame our attention. I've been in the search for something like this for 20 plus years. And I'm not professing this on the podcast because I'm just trying to sell a product or service here. This is a game changer, the biggest game changer I've ever seen. If everybody's familiar with the Enneagram of the 9 types, one of the things we've seen from people that have been through this process go towards, for those people out there that know the Enneagram system, they automatically shift to their integration type. That is another proof that this works, because I've seen people like that are, 8s that have to have more softer 2 energy in them. Do it. They get it. Or the high achievers that recognize it's not just about me, it's about the team. And they make that shift. And then they become this, like, rather than being this achiever that's always, hey, it's about me. Look at me over here. I'm making all this stuff happen. Now it's like, how do we make sure we get this done for the organization? And then they bring that achievement orientation into their job in a more focused way, and they make it about the team, which is a beautiful mixture. Any other thoughts about
Can I
please.
just make a comment?
Sure.
Why coaching is also important is because there's definitely great degree of mind resistance. So, because if you get rewired neurally inside out, your mind is screaming mercy, like, oh, what's this in me? I have all these extra powers. How do I wrap my head around what I've got? And that's causing this identity crisis. Because I used to be this Irish kid, Ryan, and now I'm somebody else, right? Now I'm like supercharged. So this is the problem, because during that transition, people need help. They need to really take that time and say, look, let's revisit where you have experienced your massive gains. Okay, you got your creativity boosted. You don't need your, sleeping pills anymore. You've got this increased joy, this kind of bubbly, giggly state. You're so happy, you're on top of your game, right? So let's reframe it. What's going on? You're not running like a headless chicken. The mind keeps going back to the old paradigm of the previous personality form. Well, your identity used to be that, but you feel different now. You don't fit that mold anymore. So that's why the mind is the one that's this silent sabotage happening at the back of your mind. No. I know you have got the chops, you have the power, you have the energy to do this and this, but are you sure? Are you really sure that you want to do this? So that's why you need the support to stabilize and integrate all these changes at the right time, at the right level, so that you're really fully in charge of what you've got.
And the other thing is about the coaching is, while you may want to extend and continue the coaching because it's enjoyable and it's helping you, 3 months is pretty much what you need to help integrate. So the investment of an organization in this is far less than those business schools, for sure. But it's also a very efficient way of operating. So, well, I appreciate all that. And again, to our listeners, this is kind of the resilient leadership method. You can think of it as a sponsor for our show. And because I really want people to know about this. It can be challenging to kind of share this with people and get them to purchase it, because the mind doesn't know how to compute how this could happen in such a short period of time. And we've gotten all these great promises and guarantees and all these big offers out there that we've done before that we might have been disappointed with after we purchased them and all those kinds of things. But I really appreciate the people that have done it. And we have a lot of testimonials that we can share and people that you can talk to, and also have a conversation with Anatoly as well, if that's something you feel interested in. So any parting words for you gentlemen today that you just want to leave us with before we close the show?
I think that to put a real fine point on it, I was contemplating this show last night as I was laying in bed before I dozed off to sleep.
I love that you got prepared.
Novel idea, isn't it? And so what keeps coming up for me, or what came up for me in that moment as I thought about it, was this idea of a fish discovers water.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever heard that kind of thinking before, but I think that's really relevant to what we're talking about, and puts it in the context of, I think, what we're exposed to and how we can kind of zoom out and see ourselves as that fish in the water that recognizes that, yes, we are surrounded by water. That, for me, just saying a fish discovers water, in my mind, puts me in that consciousness state that I need to be to really have these kind of conversations with you at an effective level. So I share that with your audience. A fish discovers water, and hopefully that does something for you.
Yeah. And you can't survive without it. Fish can't survive without it. Yes, that's another thing. Yeah. And Anatoly, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, well, it's a great discovery that we talking about so many points, because usually people are not really too keen to watch just one person talking, but having provided different angles, and especially since Ryan has, haven't gone through the reset, it provides a very unique, fresh perspective. So therefore, it's pretty important. Now, for me, since I'm coming from the, international business ethics and compliance practitioner, and I used to be getting enough flair with me delivering what I used to do with this gift that I have within the context of what I was doing. But even then, I was singled out for that. And I was always promoted to be a speaker at conferences. But then I kind of always felt that this is not the direction I should be going. So now we are more focused on what could be done to take this whole leadership development to a whole new level. And it kind of saddens me that we are the only ones sticking out as a sore thumb. So it's not like we have too much competition. We should be having competition. A school of fish are in the water, and we're competing with them. So, because that would be fair.
Yeah, it'll be great. Well, hopefully, maybe this will spark other new modalities out there that are fast and can help executives in the same way. Well, I really want to thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show today. We covered a lot of ground. Today, we really tackled the core issue behind leadership development and why traditional approaches are falling apart. We've explored why raising consciousness is the game changer that allows executives to not only survive, but thrive in today's environment. And we've shared how the resilient leader method is transforming leaders, instantly shifting them from doubt to overload and to confidence, resilience, and clarity. Now, as we continue this journey on the podcast, our focus remains on real solutions for executives who are aiming high and desire to perform at the highest levels of leadership. In a world that demands more than just strategy and execution, mastering resilience, clarity, and influence is what sets exceptional leaders apart from others. Until then, remember this: you're not at the mercy of your stress. You're not bound to outdated leadership models. The power to lead with clarity, conviction, and unstoppable resilience is within you right now, and you can discover it and release it. And if today's conversation resonated for you and you're ready to explore how to lead with greater confidence, clarity, and resilience, I invite you to reach out. Let's have a quick, no-pressure conversation about how the resilient leader method can help you become invincible in the face of today's uncertainty. The question is, are you ready to step into it? If you are, we're here. In the meantime, stay bold, stay focused, stay unfazed under fire. This is David Craig Utz, the Leadership Alchemist, signing off for now. Have a great rest of your day.